The audition room feels colder than Marco expected. Not temperature cold, spotlight cold. The kind of cold that crawls up your spine when you realize every breath, every blink, every mistake will be remembered. The massive X logo looms behind the judge's desk like a warning sign. Cameras glide silently on tracks, red lights blinking like unblinking eyes. Somewhere beyond the walls, hundreds of people murmur, waiting for either greatness or disaster. Marco stands alone at the center of the stage. He rubs his palms against his jeans, hoping no one notices how slightly they're shaking. He tells himself to breathe in, out, the way his mother taught him when he was a boy singing along to an old cassette player in their tiny living room in Quezon City. Back then, the walls were thin, the neighbors loud, the ceiling fan always rattling. But when Elvis came on, Can't Help Falling in Love, It's Now or Never, everything else faded. It was just him and the voice. "Hi," a judge says, breaking the moment. Marco blinks and looks up. 4 judges sit behind the long desk. Pearl sits in the middle, arms crossed, mouth set in that familiar straight line that seems to say he's already bored. "What's your name?" Simon asks. "Marco," he replies. His accent is soft but clear. "Marco," Simon repeats, glancing down at his notes. "Where are you from?" "Originally from the Philippines," Marco says. "I live here now." A couple of judges nod politely. The audience murmurs, nothing unkind, just curious. Simon gives a small, noncommittal, "Hm." "And what are you doing for us today?" Simon asks. Marco swallows. This is the moment. He's practiced this answer 1,000 times, alone in his room, whispering it to the mirror, imagining every possible reaction. He lifts his chin slightly. "I'll be singing Elvis Presley." For a split second, there's silence. Then a ripple moves through the room, quiet chuckles, raised eyebrows, exchanged looks. Not cruel, but doubtful. Someone in the audience lets out a small laugh before catching themselves. Simon's eyebrow arches almost imperceptibly. He leans back in his chair. "Elvis," he says, dragging the word out. "Right." One of the judges smiles kindly, the kind of smile that says good luck, you'll need it. Marco notices. His stomach tightens, but he keeps his face calm. "Which Elvis song?" Simon asks. "If I Can Dream," Marco answers. Now that gets a reaction. The laughter dies down. That song isn't flashy. It isn't easy. It's emotional. Demanding. A song that exposes you if you're not ready. Simon tilts his head. "Big song," he says. "Whenever you're ready." The pianist nods at Marco. The room grows still. Marco steps closer to the microphone, adjusts it slightly, and closes his eyes for half a second. In that instant, the judges disappear. The cameras disappear. The room dissolves. He's 10 years old again, standing barefoot on cool tile, gripping a hairbrush like a microphone while his father pretends not to tear up. He's 16, singing at a neighborhood fiesta while people stop eating just to listen. He's 25, working long hours overseas, humming Elvis songs under his breath so he doesn't forget who he is. The first piano chord rings out. Marco opens his eyes. He sings the opening line softly, almost carefully, letting the words settle. His voice is low, warm, controlled. It doesn't push. It doesn't show off. It invites. The sound rolls through the room like a slow wave. The audience shifts. Someone leans forward. Marco continues, his voice gaining confidence, color, depth. There's a natural vibrato there, not forced, not copied, just honest. It carries a quiet ache, the kind that comes from someone who understands longing, hope, and patience. Simon's pen pauses. Mid-tap. By the second verse, something changes. Marco isn't just singing anymore. He's telling the song. His posture straightens. His eyes lift. His hands move slightly, not dramatically, but with intention. Each word lands exactly where it should. The sound fills the room, bouncing off the walls, settling into the silence between breaths. The audience is completely still now. No coughing. No whispers. Just listening. When Marco reaches the pre-chorus, his voice opens up, bigger, richer, soaring without strain. It has that Elvis weight to it, that unmistakable gravity, but there's also a gentleness that feels uniquely his. He's not impersonating. He's honoring. One judge's mouth falls open. Simon leans forward, elbows on the desk, eyes narrowed, not in criticism, but in concentration. He watches Marco like he's trying to solve a puzzle that shouldn't make sense. Then the chorus hits. Marco lets go. His voice surges through the room, powerful and clean, carrying hope and desperation in equal measure. It's the kind of sound that sends shivers down spines, that makes people forget they're watching a competition. The audience reacts instantly, gasps, hands flying to mouths, eyes widening. A woman in the front row whispers, "Oh my God." Marco holds the final note of the chorus with stunning control, letting it ring just long enough before pulling back. He doesn't rush. He trusts the moment. The pianist looks at him with wide eyes. As the song builds toward its emotional peak, Marco's voice never cracks, never wavers. Instead, it grows warmer, fuller, wrapping around the lyrics like they belong to him. His eyes shine, but he doesn't cry. Not yet. He's too focused, too present. Simon exhales slowly, almost without realizing it. By the final lines, the room feels charged, electric, suspended in time. Marco delivers the last note with quiet strength, letting it fade naturally into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moves. The note hangs in the air like a memory. Scene 1 ends not with applause, but with shock, the kind that takes a moment to process. The silence after the final note doesn't break right away. It stretches, thick and heavy, as if the room itself needs time to catch up with what just happened. Marco's chest rises and falls, his hands gripping the microphone stand a little tighter than before. His ears ring faintly, not from volume, but from the sudden absence of sound. For a moment, he wonders if he sang too softly at the end, if maybe it didn't land the way it felt inside him. Then the first clap hits. Sharp, loud, certain. Another follows. Then another. Within seconds, the audience erupts, the applause crashing over him in a wave so powerful it almost knocks the breath from his lungs. People rise from their seats as if pulled up by strings. Cheers bounce off the walls, whistles cut through the noise, someone shouts his name even though they only learned it minutes ago. Marco blinks, stunned. He steps back half a pace, overwhelmed, his shoulders tensing as if he doesn't quite know what to do with all this sound. His eyes search the room, landing on faces lit with excitement, disbelief, joy. A woman in the front row wipes her eyes. A man pumps his fist in the air. The energy is wild, electric, real. Marco feels his throat tighten. At the judges' table, one judge is already on their feet, clapping hard, laughing in disbelief. Another shakes their head slowly, mouth curved into a wide, stunned smile. The third presses a hand to their chest, as if trying to steady a heartbeat that's suddenly gone off rhythm. And Simon Cowell. Simon hasn't moved. He sits there, elbows on the desk, hands clasped loosely in front of his mouth, eyes locked on Marco. His expression isn't harsh. It isn't bored. It's something far rarer, genuine astonishment. The kind that strips away the practiced persona and leaves only a man caught off guard. The applause finally begins to soften, though the energy remains buzzing, alive. Marco bows his head slightly, out of instinct more than intention. He whispers a quiet, "Thank you," into the microphone, his voice noticeably different now, lighter, trembling, human. Simon lowers his hands and clears his throat. The room stills immediately. "I need to talk," Simon says, and the audience laughs nervously, settling back into their seats. Simon glances down at the desk, then back up at Marco, as if choosing his words carefully. When he speaks again, his voice is calm, measured, but there's something underneath it. "Respect. I've been doing this for a long time," he says. "I've heard thousands of people sing Elvis Presley." A ripple of knowing laughter spreads through the crowd. "And if I'm honest," Simon continues, "most of them have absolutely no business doing so." The audience laughs again, louder this time. Marco manages a small, shaky smile. "But you," Simon says, lifting a finger slightly, "did something very few people manage to do." Simon pauses. He looks down the table, then back at Marco. "You didn't try to copy him." The room is silent again. "You didn't turn it into a gimmick. You didn't walk in here in a costume, you didn't rely on tricks. You respected the song, and more importantly, you respected yourself." Marco feels his eyes burn. He blinks rapidly, staring at a spot just above Simon's shoulder, afraid that if he looks directly at him, he might lose control. Simon leans back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. "I closed my eyes," he says, "and for a moment, I forgot where I was. And that does not happen often. The audience breaks into applause again, but Simon raises his hand slightly, signaling he's not done. There's something else, he adds. That voice, your tone, your control, the way you handled the quiet moments, that's not something you can teach. That comes from years of singing because you have to, not because you want to be famous. Marco swallows hard. His hands are shaking now, and he no longer tries to hide it. One of the other judges jumps in, unable to contain their excitement. Marco, that was breathtaking, they say. The emotion, the restraint, you pulled us in without ever forcing it. I had chills. Another judge nods enthusiastically. I've heard that song 100 times, and somehow you made it feel new. That's rare. The third judge smiles warmly. I could feel every word you sang. That wasn't a performance, it was a story. Marco finally looks up, his eyes glossy. He presses a hand briefly to his chest. Thank you, he says, his voice cracking just slightly. That means everything to me. Simon watches him closely, then leans forward again. Let me ask you something, he says. Why Elvis? The question is gentle, curious, not a challenge. Marco exhales, steadying himself. Because, when I was growing up, we didn't have much. But my father loved his music. He used to play Elvis records on an old player that barely worked. He smiles softly at the memory. When he was tired, when things were hard, he'd just sit and listen. And when I sang along, he smiled. The room listens, utterly still. Singing Elvis, Marco continues, made me feel like I could be bigger than my situation. Like I could dream. For a brief moment, Simon says nothing. Then he nods, once. That, he says quietly, makes a lot of sense. Simon straightens in his chair, the familiar authority returning, but now it's paired with something warmer. So here's the thing, he says. You walked in here, and I had expectations. Low ones. The audience laughs. You then completely destroyed them. Cheers erupt again. Simon doesn't smile. Immediately. He looks directly at Marco. I did not see that coming, he says. At all. Marco laughs softly through his emotion, lifting a hand to wipe at his eyes. He nods, unable to speak for a second. Simon glances down the table. I think we know where this is going. The judges exchange looks, grinning. Yes, one says immediately. Absolutely yes, another adds. The third judge nods firmly. 100% yes. Simon turns back to Marco. Marco, he says, it's a yes from me. The room explodes. Confetti doesn't fall, but it feels like it should. Marco brings both hands to his face, overcome, his shoulders shaking as the realization finally hits. He bows again, deeper this time, gratitude pouring out of him in every movement. As the applause roars around him, Marco steps off the stage knowing something has changed forever. Not just for him, but for everyone who thought they knew what to expect when a Filipino kid started singing Elvis.